Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something
Good.
that we all see every day, but maybe don't know that much about, and that's research design.
Ooh, interesting.
So, we're bombarded with studies and articles and all these claims like studies show.
Right, right.
And we've got 3 academic papers as our guide today to help us decipher fact from fiction.
Sounds good.
And we're going to try to help you figure out, how can you tell
Yeah.
good study from a not so good study, or,
I love.
one that you can actually use to make decisions in your life?
That's the big question, right? How do we know what to trust?
Exactly.
There's so much information out there,
Yeah.
and so much of it is conflicting. So it's
Yeah.
like, how do we actually wade through it all?
So that's where understanding research design comes in.
It's true.
I feel like it's like having X-ray vision. You can kind of see behind the curtain
Yeah,
and see how the research was actually done.
right,
So was it a really rigorous experiment?
right. Was it a double-blind study? Was it?
Right. Or was it just someone's casual observations?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, are they just kind of speculating?
Yeah.
Or is there actually a solid method behind it?
Yeah. And then how much weight should we give to the conclusions?
Absolutely.
So let's start with what exactly is research design? I mean, I know we kind of touched on it, but what is it?
So research design, you can kind of think about it
Yeah.
like a blueprint
Okay.
that researchers use to construct their studies.
Okay.
So it's basically the plan for how they're going to collect data,
Mm-hmm.
what are they going to measure, and how they're going to control for all the things that could mess up their results.
Okay.
Because the world is messy,
Right.
right? And if you're not careful, all sorts of things can influence the results.
Yeah.
And then you're not really sure what you're looking at.
It's like building a house. If you don't have a good blueprint,
Right.
the whole thing can collapse.
Exactly, exactly. You need that solid foundation. So research design is all about creating that strong foundation for your study.
So are there different blueprints
Yes,
for different types of research?
absolutely there are.
Okay.
One of the most common ones is called single factor design.
Okay.
And this is where researchers just focus on one thing,
Okay.
one element. And they call this the independent variable.
Okay.
So this is the thing they're changing on purpose
Okay.
to see what happens.
So it's like isolating one ingredient in a
Right.
recipe to see how it affects the flavor.
Exactly, exactly. You're trying to pinpoint the effect of that one thing.
Okay, so if I wanted to test a new teaching method
Yeah,
to see if it helps students learn better, I'd use a single factor design.
exactly. You could have one group of students
Okay.
who gets that new teaching method and another group who sticks with the old traditional approach.
Yeah.
And then you compare.
And that second group, the one that stays the same, that's the control group.
Exactly. The control group is like your baseline that you compare everything else to.
Right.
So you can see, did this new teaching method actually make a difference?
Right.
Or would they have learned the same amount anyway?
Makes sense. Okay. So what if you want to test that teaching method, but with the same group of students, before and after
Yeah.
they tried it out?
So that's called a within subjects design,
Okay.
where the same people experience all the different conditions.
Okay.
But here's where researchers have to be careful
Okay.
about something called order effects.
What's that?
So imagine you're testing how people react to different colors,
Okay.
like red, green, and yellow.
Mm-hmm.
If you always show red first, then green, then yellow,
Yeah.
people might just get faster
Okay.
because they've practiced the test a few times.
Interesting.
So it's not really the color affecting their response, it's just the order.
Oh, so it's like tasting different wines.
Right.
If you always taste the strongest one last,
Exactly.
your palate's all messed up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to taste those subtle differences anymore.
Yeah.
So to avoid that, researchers will randomize the order of things.
Okay.
So maybe sometimes it's red, green, yellow.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's green, yellow, red. They'll mix it up to make sure that,
Okay.
that they're really measuring the effect of the color
That makes sense.
and not just the order of presentation.
Okay, so this single factor design,
Yes.
it seems kind of simple.
Yeah, it is.
The real world's more complicated
You're right.
than just changing one thing, right?
Things are rarely that simple.
Right.
So that brings us to factorial designs.
Okay.
And this is where we start to get into the real nitty-gritty.
Okay.
Here, researchers are studying the effects of multiple independent variables at the same time.
Whoa.
So now we're talking about 2 or 3 or even more factors all influencing the outcome.
This is where it gets really interesting.
This is where it gets really interesting
Yeah.
because you can see how these different variables interact with each other.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so one of the papers we looked at
Huh?
describes a study
Okay.
where they wanted to understand how memory for words
Mm-hmm.
is affected by both the number of words on a list,
Okay.
and whether people are given category cues to help them remember.
Okay, so there's two things they're changing.
Exactly. Two independent variables.
Okay.
The number of words and whether there's cues or not.
So instead of just changing one ingredient at a time, now we're tweaking like multiple knobs.
Exactly right. We're getting a little fancier with our recipe here.
Right, and this is where those interaction effects come in.
That's right. Because now you can see
Yeah.
how does changing the number of words affect memory differently,
Okay.
depending on whether there are cues or not.
Gotcha.
It's like baking a cake.
Okay.
The amount of sugar you use might have one effect if you're using butter,
Yeah.
but a totally different effect if you're using oil.
So the ingredients are interacting.
Exactly. The ingredients interact.
Okay.
And that's what makes factorial design so powerful.
Okay, my mind is already blown. Like, thinking about how much more there is to this than I realized.
Right.
But what happens when researchers, like, can't control all the variables?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Like, in the real world, it's messy. You can't always perfectly set things up.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to quasi-experimental designs.
Quasi.
Quasi-experimental.
That sounds fancy.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Okay, so what are those?
So these are often used when you're studying things that you can't ethically or practically manipulate.
Okay.
Like you can't randomly assign people to be male or female.
Right.
Or to grow up in certain socioeconomic conditions.
Yeah.
So you have to get a little more creative
Okay.
and work with the groups or situations that already exist.
So you're still following a blueprint,
Right.
but maybe you have to make some substitutions based on, like, the materials available?
Exactly. You're working with what you've got,
Yeah.
but you're still trying to be as rigorous as possible.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, let's say you're studying the effects of a new city ordinance.
Okay.
Well, you can't force some cities to implement the ordinance
Right.
and others not to.
Yeah.
So you might compare cities that have adopted the ordinance with those that haven't
Okay.
and see, did it make a difference in whatever you're measuring?
But there could be, like, tons of other differences between those cities.
Exactly. That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
So you have to take those other factors into account as much as possible.
So it's like comparing two cakes
Right.
baked with similar ingredients.
Yeah.
But in ovens, that might be at slightly different temperatures.
Yeah. Or maybe one baker's more experienced.
Yeah.
You know, or all these other factors
Yeah.
that can influence the outcome.
And so you have to be really careful
Exactly.
about how much weight you give to the results.
You have to be cautious with your interpretation.
Yeah. Okay, so this is already making me rethink how I interpret all those headlines I see
Right.
about studies. But I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg. Oh, there's more. There's more.
Like there are even more types of research designs out there.
There are.
Oh, boy.
You've got correlational and causal comparative designs.
Okay. Those sound intriguing.
They are.
All right, so let's dive into those next.
Let's do it.
We'll continue our deep dive into the world of research.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Okay, so we covered experiments and quasi-experiments.
All right.
Now let's talk about these correlational and causal comparative designs.
Yes.
They sound kind of like detectives.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, right?
Mhm.
Like instead of controlling everything,
Yeah,
you're more observing what's already happening
exactly.
and trying to find patterns.
You're like Sherlock Holmes of research.
So let's start with correlational designs.
Okay.
What are those all about?
So correlational designs are all about examining relationships between variables, but without manipulating them directly.
So no tweaking the ingredients,
No tweaking.
just observing.
It's observing. You're looking for connections and patterns that already exist. So it's like we're now analyzing the finished cake.
Yeah.
Instead of baking it.
Exactly. You're trying to figure out what ingredients went into it.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, let's say you're interested in the link between stress and sleep.
Mm-hmm.
A correlational study might ask people about their stress levels
Okay.
and their sleep habits and see, is there a relationship?
Okay.
Do people who report more stress also tend to sleep less?
Okay, so you're not like trying to make people stressed
No.
or sleep deprived.
We're not doing any of that.
Just observe.
Just observing what's naturally happening.
And how do you know what's causing what?
Yeah.
Like maybe lack of sleep makes you stressed,
Right.
or maybe it's the other way around.
Ah, you've hit on a very important point. Correlational designs can reveal interesting relationships, but they can't prove cause and effect.
Right.
Just because two things are related doesn't mean one causes the other.
Right. It's like that classic example.
Yeah, what's that?
Ice cream sales and crime rates
Oh, yeah.
both go up in the summer.
Right. Does ice cream cause crime?
Probably not.
Probably not.
There's another variable at play.
Exactly. There's probably something else going on.
Yeah, like the heat.
The heat, yeah.
Makes people do crazy things.
Makes everyone a little more on edge.
And eat more ice cream.
And eat more ice cream, exactly.
So this is why understanding research design is so important.
Little important.
You see a headline that says X causes Y.
Right.
But maybe it was just a correlational study.
Exactly. And now you know to be a little skeptical.
Yeah, don't believe everything you read.
Right. Think critically.
Okay, so what about these causal comparative designs?
All right, so causal comparative designs are similar to correlational studies,
Okay.
but with a slightly different focus.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They still explore relationships,
Mm-hmm.
but they specifically compare pre-existing groups to understand why differences might exist between them.
So now we're comparing two different cakes.
Yes.
Baked with different ingredients.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what led to the differences in the final product.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
You're a natural at this research design stuff.
Okay, so give me an example with like real people, not cakes.
All right, let's say you want to understand why some students excel in math
Yeah.
while others struggle. A causal comparative design might compare students who receive different types of math instruction early on
Okay.
to see if those early experiences contribute to later differences in achievement.
But isn't it hard to isolate just the math instruction?
Yeah, that's the challenge.
Like there are other things going on, right?
There are so many other factors that could be at play.
Like good teachers.
Yeah, quality of teaching, parental support, even just natural aptitude.
Right, like all those things could play a role.
Absolutely.
So how do you tease all that apart?
So researchers try to control for these other factors as much as possible,
Okay.
but it's not always easy.
Yeah.
They might try to match the groups on those other variables or statistically control for them in their analysis.
So it's like trying to figure out if the difference in taste between two cakes is due to the type of flour used,
Yes.
even though the ovens were different temperatures.
Different temperatures, yeah.
And maybe one baker was more experienced.
Exactly. It highlights the complexity of research in the real world.
Yeah. Things are messy.
Things are messy.
But you can still learn things
Absolutely.
from these causal comparative designs.
Right. Even with the limitations, they can provide valuable insights.
Okay, before we wrap up this section,
Yep.
I have to ask about that deep sea diver study you mentioned earlier.
Ooh, yes, the memory recall one.
Yeah. What kind of design did they use for that?
So that study used what's called a mixed factorial design,
Okay, a mixed factorial design.
which is a fancy way of saying it combines elements of both experimental
Okay.
and quasi-experimental approaches.
Interesting. So it's like a hybrid?
It's a hybrid. It's the best of both worlds.
Okay, tell me more.
So they were interested in whether the environment where you learn something affects your ability to recall it later.
Okay.
So they had deep sea divers learn lists of words,
Okay.
either on land or underwater.
Okay.
And then they tested their recall in both environments,
So on land, A and D, underwater?
on land and underwater, to see if there was a match.
Oh, that's a cool study.
That's a very cool study.
So the learning environment was the thing they were manipulating, right?
Exactly. That was their independent variable.
But they couldn't randomly assign people to be divers or not.
Right. You can't just force people to become deep sea divers.
That's true.
So that's where the quasi-experimental element comes in.
Okay, so what did they find?
Well, the results were pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat.
They found that recall was best when the learning and recall environments matched.
Okay.
So divers who learned words underwater remembered them better when tested underwater.
Interesting.
And those who learned on land performed better when tested on land.
Wow, so it's like our brains are kind of encoding the context of where we learn things.
Yeah.
And that context can like act as a cue. Right.
when we try to remember the information later.
Exactly. It's like a little reminder.
That's so cool.
It is cool, right? It makes me wonder if I should try studying in different environments
Yeah.
to see if it improves my recall. Yeah, maybe mix it up a little bit. Like maybe do some flashcards while hanging upside down.
Maybe not that extreme.
Or write my notes underwater.
I don't know about that.
Just kidding. Sort of.
But the takeaway here, I think,
Yeah,
is that research design really matters.
it does.
Knowing the different approaches and their limitations
Yeah.
helps us make sense of all the research we encounter in our daily lives.
Right. It's like we've been given this decoder ring
Yeah, a secret code.
to understand scientific studies.
Exactly.
We can start to see those headlines and sound bites in a new light,
Mm-hmm.
recognize the complexity
Yeah.
and the careful considerations that go into designing a good study.
It's not just as simple as like
There you go.
a study showed.
Right.
There's so much more to it.
This deep dive has been amazing.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I feel like I've gained valuable insights into how researchers approach the quest for knowledge.
It's a fascinating process, isn't it?
Whiz!
Like, how do we actually learn things? How do
Yeah.
we know what's true?
I feel like I can now ask better questions and evaluate claims more critically.
That's the goal.
Yeah, and understand the nuances behind those bold pronouncements that we often see.
Right, right. Not just taking things at face value.
And that's what's so exciting about understanding research design.
What is it?
It's empowering.
Absolutely.
We can be more informed consumers of information.
Right. We don't have to just blindly accept everything we read.
Exactly.
We can think for ourselves.
Well said. This has been a fantastic journey
It has been fun.
through the world of research design. We've covered everything from controlled experiments to real-world observations.
That's a whole spectrum.
It is. And I think we all have a better grasp now
I hope so.
of how research is done. So remember, everyone, the next time you encounter a research study,
Yes.
Or a scientific claim, take a moment to consider the design behind it.
think about what we've talked about.
Yeah, what type of study was it?
Right? Was it an experiment? Was it a correlational study?
What were the limitations?
Exactly what could have influenced the results?
And what questions remain unanswered?
Because there are always more questions.
There are. Research is an ongoing process.
It never ends.
Well, this has been another fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for joining us,
Thanks for having me.
and keep those knowledge-seeking brains engaged.
Until next time.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next video.